Hi everyone, Susan here with the Sacramento History Museum, and I am here to do a Find Out More Friday, and we were kind of debating this week about what we really wanted to talk about because it is October and we wanted maybe to do something spooky or a little bit more haunted or something like that. And as we were doing research, we kind of just realized that there's a lot of true crime things that happened in Sacramento or has ties to Sacramento in some way. So we thought we would focus on one of the people who has quite the history with Sacramento. Now, as it turns out, Sacramento actually has quite a history, even from its beginning, of serial killers who were here in this city. In fact, there was a study in 2002 that said that for the previous 30 years, from 2002 before then, that 15% of serial killers had ties to Sacramento in some way. 15%. I just think that's an astronomical number for one place to have. And so, yeah, there's a lot to kind of choose from. And I think if we do have any true crime fans out there, you probably recognize some of the names. Most recently, I'm thinking of Joseph D'Angelo, Dorothea Puente. There was the Vampire of Sacramento, which is pretty spooky, the Unabomber. And then there was the 1941 Mad Killer of Sacramento, whose crimes were actually never solved. They just stopped eventually. So that one's kind of spooky. But today what we are going to focus on is we're going to go back to the 19th century, and we're going to talk about somebody who lived in this building behind me, the Mechanics Exchange building. Now, if you've taken our ghost tours before, unfortunately we had to cancel them this year because of COVID, you might be familiar with this story. The story is that of Charles Mortimer. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Charles Mortimer and what he was doing here in Sacramento. So the story sort of starts in 1872, September 20th to be exact. And it's not actually too far from where I'm standing. So Mortimer lived here, but on September 20th, 1872, in the evening, the body of Mary Gibson, or Shaw, sometimes her last name is Shaw Gibson, but for these purposes, we'll be saying Gibson. Mary Gibson was found in her home, which was also her business, up on Jaboom Street, which is actually not far from here at all. So very close to where we're standing. Her body was discovered. It looked like she had put up quite a fight for her life, but unfortunately she had passed away in her home. And Mary Gibson, it was discovered in her room. She had a clump of hair in her hand that she had clearly, grabbed from the person who was attacking her. It was determined to be probably beard hair. It was reddish brown. She had a clump of that hair. There was a glass of beer nearby her, which after they did some testing, they discovered it had strychnine in there. And so they think maybe somebody tried to poison her at some point. She was a proprietress of a saloon, so, had some money, and they did discover that there was a pocket ripped out of her dress that she was wearing, and probably about $500 was missing. So there was quite a few things that were amiss in her space. So as the officers were kind of investigating this crime scene with Mary Gibson, not too far from here, there was another officer. Let me just make sure I get that officer's name right. Officer Harris. He didn't know about that crime yet, and he was over here in what we would call Old Sacramento now, and he ran into Charles Mortimer, and he knew something was off because Charles Mortimer had a lot of blood on his face. There was something weird with his beard going on. His clothes were torn. And he said, "Are you okay? What's going on? Are you okay?" And Mortimer said, "I was just jumped by a couple of men, but I am okay." And he said, "Okay." The officer said, "Let me walk you home." And he did. He walked him home to the Mechanics Exchange building, where Mortimer's wife or partner, depending on the different articles you read, sometimes she is Carrie Mortimer, his wife. Sometimes she's Carrie Spencer. So I'm not sure, actually, if they got married or not, or if they were just partners. And she was there, and so he left. And when the officer left, it wasn't too long that he learned about the murder that had happened just up the street. And so he immediately went back to Mortimer, because he said, "Okay, this is wrong. Something's wrong here." And so he went back to where Mortimer was, but Mortimer had left. And so he arrested Carrie Spencer, and as he is arresting her and bringing her to the jail, they actually run into Mortimer along the way, and he has shaved. He has gone to the barber in that time, and he has shaved, and now he is clean shaven, so the evidence of that part at least is kind of gone. So they end up in jail, and there's this lengthy trial, of course, that happens in March 1873, so almost a year-ish later. And at this trial, you know, the barber testifies and says, yes, I shaved him. And I actually have a picture here of before and after. So we've got a picture of Charles Mortimer, which everyone kind of knew him as. He always had a beard. And so this was a picture taken maybe not long before, but definitely before the murder took place. And then this happened, this is kind of his mugshot, this was after. But most people didn't know him to be clean shaven. He always had a beard, so that's pretty suspicious. But you can see, like, that's one of the pieces of evidence that they said was, okay, well, you know, Mary Gibson had a chunk of hair in her hand that was from a beard, and this is what happened here. And he had brownish red hair as well. So that was kind of one of the pieces of evidence, I guess, that they put in. Now, Mortimer's wife or partner, Carrie, she was really trying to save herself in this whole situation. There was eyewitnesses that saw them together drinking at Mary Gibson's saloon, and so they kind of assumed that she was an accomplice. So in order to, like, save herself, she testified against Mortimer and was kind of, you know, very important to him getting a guilty verdict, which of course he did. He was found guilty, and he was they decided that he would be executed. So oh, I forgot to mention too that some of the other evidence that they found in the rooms behind me here, there was dresses of Mary Gibson's found in those rooms. There was a ring, and the coat that Mortimer had been wearing had an envelope in it full of strychnine. So pretty suspicious, pretty suspicious. So obviously he's found guilty. He is sentenced to be executed, and he's kind of awaiting the sentence. It is the next year, it's like April 1873, so he had been sentenced in March, and then about a month later, where he's being held in jail, somebody rings the bell at about 1:30 in the morning, which is pretty suspicious, okay? You don't really ring a jail's bell at that time of day unless you're up to no good. And it turns out this person was. So the deputy went out into the yard, and he noticed a man standing there. And he noticed there was just a lot of things that were weird. He didn't have a hat on. He didn't have shoes on. His coat was turned inside out, and he was wearing a mask. But worst of all, he had a gun pointed directly at the deputy sheriff at the time. Should we move this way a little? All right, let's see, moving. Okay, we're good. So the deputy sheriff sees this gun and, of course, pulls out his own and shoots first. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending, he does kill this gentleman that's there, but they don't know who this person is. He never identified himself. So, we'll scoot this way just a little. Get out of the truck's way. So, they have this person that they don't know who it is, but they suspect that it has something to do with Mortimer because Mortimer was going to be executed fairly soon, and so they wanted, they had brought Mortimer in to see if he can identify the person. And he does. He identifies him as William Flynn. And as it turns out, Charles Mortimer, his real name was Charles Flynn, and this was his brother, William Flynn, who was 23 years old at the time, lived in Vermont, and came to Sacramento because he couldn't bear the thought of his brother being executed. Charles Mortimer hadn't seen his brother in 16 years, and so he actually identified him as his brother because of photos that had been sent to him, pictures that he had seen of his brother, but this was a 23-year-old who hadn't seen his brother for 16 years and then tries to save his life and, of course, loses his own in the process. So, according to all the records, what happened after this was when Mortimer is seeing his brother there, he goes insane, or at least that's what Mortimer wanted them to think. and he takes a lock of his brother's hair, he cuts it off of his head, he brings it back to the cell with him, and he speaks to it, and he caresses it, and he talks to it as if it is his brother. And what he's trying to do, according again to the records, is he's trying to feign insanity so that he isn't executed. He wants them to believe that he has gone insane, that he is just desperately sad and grief-stricken because of the death of his brother. And so he has this lock of hair in his prison cell with him, but of course it doesn't work. He is in fact executed on May 15th. Let me just double check that. Yes, excuse me. May 15th, 1873. Charles Mortimer is in fact executed in the courtyard, or in the yard of the city hall that they had. Now, while he was in prison, it came to light that Charles Mortimer actually was responsible for the murder of another woman, Caroline Purnell, who died in 1872, May 1872. This was very interesting because they had actually already arrested somebody for her murder. It was her paramour, Henry Beck, that they thought had done this murder, but then Charles, or it was really Carrie, his wife, who said that he had done this, and then he said, oh my gosh, okay, well, he confessed to that one as well. So we know that he was responsible for at least two different murders. Now, these weren't the first crimes that he had ever committed. In fact, previous to this, in the 1860s, he was doing assaults and robberies, and finally he convinced somehow an officer that he was reformed, and that not only was he reformed, but I will show you where I have buried my loot. And so he brought an officer out to this kind of empty field of space, and he said, okay, I buried my loot right over here. You can see it's disturbed. And the officer, somewhat foolishly, bent down to look at it. And while the officer did that, Mortimer hit him over the head, stole his gun, and then beat him. And at the time, there was a few news articles that said that this man had died, but he didn't actually. And he actually survived this. And he made a full recovery, it sounds like, and then he was able to assist in the arrest of Mortimer a few months later. And Mortimer, at that time, again, he was doing just a lot of really bad stuff, mainly in San Francisco. And he ends up serving a 7-year sentence in San Quentin. And he is let go. He's released from San Quentin in early 1872. And then Caroline Purnell is murdered in May of 1872. And then a little bit later, of course, Mary Gibson is murdered as well. So it's pretty sad, that story. And then Mortimer is executed in 1873. So that's just one of the many stories that kind of happened here in Sacramento, happened here in Old Sacramento, in fact, but it's one of many. Sacramento has this incredibly weird history, I would say, of true crime. So if you are into the kind of true crime podcasts and whatnot, Sacramento would actually be a really interesting case study to do. So I hope you enjoyed this week's Find Out More Friday, and that you will join us next week for our kind of final one in October. Thank you.